Well, hello everybody, and thank you for clicking and entering the course. I am Christian Garman from the University of West Florida's Innovation Institute, and I'm sitting with Dr. Bill Huth, distinguished university professor in the discipline of economics. First of all, Dr. Huth, that's quite a title. Well done.
Well, thanks, Christian. I appreciate that.
I love it. Good to have you with us. We've already, those of us who are watching, we've already met you in the video piece that kind of showed who you are and what you do. Right. You love your time in the water, obviously.
Yes, I do.
But I just introduced you as an economist. And when you and I were talking about topics that we were going to discuss, something you suggested, which I thought was so interesting. And listen, I'm 42 years old. I've lived in Pensacola since I was 4. I've been to the beach hundreds of times, and it had never crossed my mind. And it was the idea of the economic value of the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. Well, actually, it's a very difficult topic to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And the value of it's huge. And it's not just economic. Aldo Leopold in 1949 wrote a book, the Sand County Almanac, and in there he developed the concept of what's called a land ethic. And he was really harsh to economists. And he said, you really can't measure, what the natural resources that we're endowed with on this planet, you can't measure them just in terms of economic value or dollars to humans. That it needed to be more encompassing than that. And so since that time, economists developed the idea of ecosystem services. Those are things that an economic environment provides not only to humans, but also habitat for animals, etc. And then went about looking at ways to establish values for those. So when we look at like the hierarchy of economic valuation, we can look at the Gulf of Mexico in terms of two kinds of valuations. One is basically a consumptive use, or what we might call, it's a direct value, use value, and the other is basically a indirect value, and that includes things like a bequest value, and it also includes things like existence value. Even though we might not ever visit the Gulf of Mexico, we probably have a willingness to pay to have it there in a pristine fashion, so for us to visit, should we want to do so in the future. Same way, we have a value to bequest a pristine Gulf of Mexico to future generations, our children's children's children. So we would like them to have, basically a Gulf of Mexico as well. So how you put dollars, which is something that humans really need to make decisions with, how you put dollars on the Gulf of Mexico is really an important topic. And economists have been doing that, measuring use value, both direct and indirect, and non-use value in terms of, in terms of bequest and existence values, for a while now, mainly via survey research and willingness to pay. There have been a lot of studies of use value and economic impact that the Gulf has. As a matter of fact, one done about 2011, I think it was, or 2010, suggested that just the Gulf of Mexico states, Texas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, together basically contributed about $2 trillion annually to gross domestic product of the U.S. economy. That's quite a lot.
That's a lot of money.
And that's just the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. When you look at the Gulf of Mexico, of course, it basically spans from, Key West, actually the dry tortuga is off of Key West, all the way around down to Brownsville, Texas. That's the U.S. Gulf. But then there's Mexico all the way to Cancun, and then there's basically the western shore of Cuba. And together, Cuba and Mexico, also contribute, to the economic value of the Gulf, and that's probably another $60 billion.
So we're talking.
That's just use value.
Now, let me ask you this. You mentioned the states, the American states that are on the Gulf Coast. I would imagine each state sort of knows their specific value in terms of what the Gulf is worth to them. That's got to be a big part of the puzzle as well, because what comes to mind is someplace like South Alabama, where they have a relatively small Gulf Coast, South Baldwin County, or Mississippi as well. Yeah. But when you drive into South Baldwin County, it is absolutely gorgeous. And I've always thought they really make sure it's gorgeous because they've got this little area where a lot of folks are going to come. They want it to be.
And they do.
Yeah.
When you look at reef structures that they've put off the coast there, they almost have as many reefs, although they're not the quality reefs that Florida has, but almost as many as Florida does. So Alabama really does support a rather large fishery, if you will,
yeah.
For both recreation, tourism. Florida has a lot of that and not so much minerals. Texas has a lot of minerals. Actually, if you look at it, about 70% of the economic, it's a contribution in terms of use value comes from the mineral deposits in the Gulf, oil, primarily. So, and Alabama has that. Florida, of course, we basically haven't drilled off Florida, but I'm sure we've got those resources preserved. Let's call that a bequest value, if you will, for future generations.
The bequest part of that is something that's also just as interesting. That, of course, I want my children and my children's children, all of them, to enjoy all the things that I've enjoyed.
Right. You don't want all the snapper to be gone from the Gulf.
Precisely. Absolutely. So that's a big part of it as well. So just to wrap up this topic, was the total the value, give or take, is it, as you say, $2 trillion?
It's more than that. That was just a use value that I gave you, and that was basically a study a few years ago in response to the BP oil spill, because I think it was the BP spill that really awakened the U.S. to the value that the Gulf of Mexico has.
And how much the risk was all of a sudden with that oil spill. Like people said, whoa, are we about to lose something that's incredibly valuable?
Yeah, Mexico had a spill as well, in an earlier time period. And so when you look at the Gulf of Mexico, there's an exclusive economic zone that really divides the Gulf in half, with the north part of the Gulf where we are, and then the south part of the Gulf with Cuba and Mexico. And that's also important because we're looking at the entire Gulf of Mexico.
So do you have, as we wrap this particular segment up, do you have some sort of
No, we don't.
Number?
That's just it. And I think that's something that needs to be computed, to both non-use and use values, so that we do need to spend effort, to measuring, to the contribution that the Gulf of Mexico makes not only to us, but all the ecosystem services that it has, carbon sequestration, et cetera, habitat, all of those things, because the Gulf of Mexico is important to animal populations as well.
Well, I knew when you suggested the topic that it was highly interesting, and certainly it is. Thanks for illuminating it so much.
Sure, and there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet from NOAA, et cetera, that you can go to and get additional information about the value of the Gulf.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because one thing we are going to try and provide in this course, not just with you, but with the other professors as well, will be those sort of additional locations for more data for anybody that really wants to get in deep to whatever topic we discussed. Bill, I appreciate it. It's so interesting.
Great, Christian. Thanks.
We'll see you next time.